The courtroom in Ridgeline County had seen murder trials, organized crime cases, and political corruption hearings. But on that rainy Monday morning, every seat was filled nearly an hour before the judge entered. Reporters lined the back wall with notebooks already open. Local residents whispered to one another as television cameras waited outside the courthouse doors, hoping to capture the woman everyone had been talking about for months. According to every newspaper headline, Danielle Bennett was one of the most dangerous drug traffickers the county had ever arrested. According to the arrest report, officers had discovered 2 kilograms of cocaine hidden inside the trunk of her car during what had been described as a routine traffic stop. The story seemed simple. The evidence appeared overwhelming. To most people in the courtroom, today's trial looked like nothing more than a formality before a lengthy prison sentence. The heavy courtroom doors opened, and 2 deputy marshals escorted Danielle Bennett inside, wearing an orange jail uniform and silver handcuffs. Conversations immediately faded into silence. Some people stared with curiosity, while others looked at her with open judgment. She could feel every pair of eyes following her, but her expression never changed. She walked with calm confidence, her shoulders straight and her eyes focused ahead instead of on the crowd surrounding her. There was no anger in her face. No fear and no attempt to earn sympathy. That alone confused several jurors before the trial had even begun. Across the courtroom, Detective Grant. Mercer adjusted the gold badge clip neatly to his pressed uniform. 16 years in law enforcement had earned him a reputation as one of Ridgeline County's toughest narcotics investigators. He was respected by fellow officers, trusted by prosecutors, and admired by much of the community for helping remove violent criminals from the streets. Parents thanked him during neighborhood meetings. Local newspapers often quoted him. Whenever large drug seizures made headlines, to nearly everyone present, Mercer represented everything a police officer should be: disciplined, experienced, and committed to protecting innocent families from dangerous crime. As Judge Harold Woodmore entered the courtroom, everyone stood before quietly taking their seats again. The room settled into complete silence. The state of Ridgeline versus Danielle Bennett, the clock announced. District Attorney Michael Reynolds rose confidently from the prosecution table. He briefly addressed the jury, describing the case as another example of dedicated police officers risking their lives to protect their community from narcotics trafficking. He praised the work of local law enforcement and reminded jurors that drugs destroyed neighborhoods, separated families, and fueled violent crime throughout America. Every word reinforced the public's confidence in the badge, while emphasizing the enormous responsibility carried by honest police officers. Each day, then, he called his first witness, Detective Grant Mercer. Mercer approached the witness stand with steady confidence. After taking the oath to tell the truth, he settled comfortably into his chair. Detective Mercer Reynolds began. Please explain to the jury what happened on the night of October 14th. Mercer's voice carried naturally through the silent courtroom. My partner and I were conducting routine patrol on Route 17 when I observed a black sedan drifting between lanes with what appeared to be a broken tail light. Based on those violations, I initiated a lawful traffic stop. He paused just long enough for every juror to remain focused. The driver identified herself as Danielle Bennett. During the stop, she appeared unusually nervous, avoided eye contact, and gave inconsistent answers regarding where she had been traveling. Based on my training and experience, I requested permission to search the vehicle. And did she consent? Reynolds asked. Yes, Mercer answered. Without hesitation, she verbally consented. Several jurors quietly nodded while taking notes. When I opened the trunk, Mercer continued. I located a gray duffel bag beneath a blanket. Inside were 2 individually wrapped packages containing approximately 2 kilograms of cocaine. A quiet murmur spread through the gallery before the bailiff restored order. Reynolds walked toward the evidence table, where the gray duffel bag rested inside a clear protective container. Is this the same bag? It is. Did the defendant say anything after the drugs were discovered? Mercer slowly turned toward Danielle before looking back at the jury. She offered me $10,000 in cash if I would forget I'd ever seen the bag. Several jurors exchanged uncomfortable glances. Throughout the testimony, Danielle never interrupted, never shook her head, and never displayed outrage. Instead, she quietly picked up a yellow legal pad and wrote a single sentence with slow, careful handwriting. Her attorney glanced down at the page, before looking back toward the witness stand without saying a word. Mercer noticed the writing and smiled confidently. He believed the case was already over. He had no idea that every sentence he spoke under oath was bringing him one step closer to destroying his own career. Susan Hartley remained seated for several seconds after the prosecutor finished. Unlike many defense attorneys, who rushed to object at every opportunity,
she had spent the entire morning listening.
Her legal pad contained only a handful of notes, each written in precise block letters. She adjusted her glasses, stood slowly, and walked toward the witness stand without a trace of urgency. The silence that followed seemed louder than any objection could have been. "Good afternoon, Detective Mercer." Mercer leaned back comfortably. "Counselor, you've served with the Ridgeline County Sheriff's Office for 16 years. That's correct. And during those years, you've made hundreds of narcotics arrests. I've made enough to know what I'm looking at." No doubt, Susan replied with a polite smile. Protecting communities from illegal drugs is an honorable responsibility. Several jurors nodded. Susan wasn't attacking law enforcement. She was acknowledging the difficult work performed by honest officers. "Every day, our communities depend on good police officers." She continued, "Families sleep more peacefully because courageous men and women wear a badge." Mercer smiled slightly, believing she was strengthening his credibility. But with that responsibility comes something equally important. He folded his hands. The truth. The courtroom grew noticeably quieter. Susan picked up a copy of the arrest report. "You testified that Miss Bennett voluntarily consented to a search of her vehicle. Did you remember those exact words?" "I do, and you're absolutely certain?" Mercer answered without hesitation. "Yes." Susan turned another page. "You also testified that she attempted to bribe you with $10,000. Correct, that was a significant event. It certainly was so significant that you would never forget it. No." She looked toward the jury before returning her attention to the detective. "Would you please point out where that attempted bribe appears?" "In your original arrest report." Mercer blinked once. "It may not be in the initial report." Susan waited. "It could be documented elsewhere where I'd have to review the file." She handed the report to the bailiff, who delivered it to the witness stand. "Take your time." Mercer flipped through every page. Nothing. He checked again, still nothing. "The jury has the same report," Susan said calmly. "Please show them where you documented an attempted felony bribery." A faint crease appeared across Mercer's forehead. "It appears it wasn't included." Susan nodded respectfully. So an event serious enough to remember perfectly 8 months later somehow never found its way into the official report. The prosecutor immediately stood, objection argumentative. Judge Whitmore looked towards Susan. "Rephrase," she smiled politely. "Detective, is there any written record created on the night of the arrest mentioning the alleged bribe?" "No." "Any supplemental report?" "No." "Any audio recording?" "No." "Any body camera footage?" "No." A quiet murmur drifted through the courtroom before the bailiff restored order. Susan thanked the judge and returned to the podium. "Let's discuss consent." Mercer straightened again. "You testified Miss Bennett verbally consented?" "Yes." "Was that consent recorded?" "No, witnessed by another officer." "My partner was nearby. Did he hear her consent?" "I assume he did." "You assume Mercer hesitated for the first time?" "I believe he did." Susan paused long enough for every juror to notice. Detective assumptions and facts are not always the same thing. She allowed the sentence to settle before continuing. "You've testified in dozens of trials. Hundreds. Accurate reports protect both citizens and police officers. Of course, and when reports are incomplete, everyone loses." "Yes." Susan nodded. "I agree." For the first time, several jurors looked away from Mercer and toward Danielle. Throughout the exchange, Danielle had remained perfectly composed. She didn't celebrate small victories or react to Mercer's hesitation. Instead, she continued writing on the yellow legal pad resting in front of her. One juror noticed that she wasn't writing random notes. She appeared to be documenting every answer in chronological order, every question, every pause, every inconsistency, as though she had trained herself to preserve facts instead of emotions. Judge Whitmore quietly observed the same thing. He had presided over thousands of witnesses during his career. Most defendants looked frightened. Some looked angry, others looked defeated. Danielle Bennett looked prepared. Not rehearsed, prepared. There was a difference. Susan returned to counsel table before asking one final question. "Detective Mercer, you testified that Miss Bennett watched you as though she were taking notes." "That's right." Susan turned toward Danielle. "She still is." Mercer glanced across the courtroom. Danielle slowly raised her eyes from the legal pad and met his gaze for only a moment before calmly writing another line. No smile, no anger. Just absolute focus for the first time since taking the witness stand. Detective Grant Mercer felt something unfamiliar settle in the pit of his stomach. Uncertainty. The following morning, the courthouse was even more crowded than it had been the day before. Word had spread throughout Ridgeline County that something unexpected had happened during Detective Mercer's testimony. The local news stations no longer described the trial as an open and shut drug case. Instead, their headlines asked a different question. Had the jury witnessed the first crack in the prosecution's story? Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere had changed. The same jurors who had entered with quiet confidence now studied every witness more carefully. They had been reminded that justice was never meant to be based on assumptions or appearances. Every person who entered a courtroom deserved the same thing. A fair hearing, honest evidence, and truthful testimony. Judge Widmore called the court to order. The defense may proceed. Susan hardly stood. Your Honor, the defense calls Danielle Bennett a soft wave. Of whispers moved across the gallery. Danielle stood from the defense table, the chain connecting her handcuffs making only a faint sound. As she walked toward the witness stand, she raised her right hand, took the oath, and sat with the same calm posture she had maintained. Since the trial began, Susan approached slowly. Miss Bennett, were you carrying illegal drugs on the night you were arrested? No. Did you give Detective Mercer permission to search your vehicle? No. Did you ever offer him $10,000? No, her answers were simple. Direct and unwavering. Susan nodded. Tell the jury what happened. Danielle folded her hands together before speaking. I remember that evening because I had trained myself for years to observe details most people overlook. I noticed the weather, the traffic, the time on every passing sign, and every movement made before I was ever approached. Several jurors leaned forward. I stopped because emergency lights appeared behind me. Before Detective Mercer ever walked to my driver's window, he walked to the rear of his own vehicle. She paused. I watched him through my side mirror. The courtroom became perfectly silent. He opened his trunk, Susan asked gently. How certain are you I don't guess what happened next? He removed a gray duffel bag. Detective Mercer shifted slightly in his seat. I never took my eyes off that mirror. Daniel continued speaking with remarkable precision. I was ordered out of my vehicle. I was never asked for permission to search my car. I never consented. I never attempted to bribe anyone. The prosecutor rose immediately. Objection, self-serving testimony. Overruled, Judge Widmore replied. Danielle continued. My grandmother raised me with one principle that mattered. Above everything else, she glanced briefly toward the second row, where Lorraine Bennett sat quietly holding a small silver cross. She taught me that integrity is something nobody can take from you, unless you surrender it yourself. Lorraine lowered her head. Wiping away a tear, Danielle looked back toward the jury. I've met many outstanding police officers in my life. The courtroom seemed surprised by the statement. The overwhelming majority serve with honor. They protect neighborhoods, rescue families, comfort victims, and put themselves in danger for complete strangers every day. Several officers seated in the gallery listened carefully. But when someone abuses that badge, they don't only betray one citizen. She looked directly at the jury. They betray every honest officer who wears it with integrity. A few jurors slowly nodded. The badge represents public trust. Her voice remained steady. In public trust survives only when truth survives. Susan smiled almost imperceptibly. The prosecutor stood for cross-examination. Miss Bennett, he began confidently. You certainly speak like someone with legal training. I've learned to pay attention. You expect this jury to believe you memorized every minute of a traffic stop. That happened months ago. I expect them to weigh facts. Nothing more, nothing less. He walked closer. Who exactly are you? Daniel met his eyes without hesitation. The answer to that question is coming. The prosecutor frowned. What does that mean? It means the truth doesn't arrive because someone wants it to. She paused. It arrives when every piece finally fits. Even Judge Widmore seemed intrigued. The prosecutor abandoned his prepared questions. The jury noticed, Detective Mercer noticed. Everyone in the courtroom sensed the direction of the trial had shifted. Outside television crews prepared for another round of live reports as courthouse employees whispered in hallways about the woman who refused to be intimidated. Some stories remind us that justice depends on courageous citizens, honorable law enforcement officers, working toward the same goal. The truth, a single dishonest officer can damage public confidence. But countless dedicated officers restore that trust every day through integrity, accountability, and service. Likewise, courage often comes from ordinary people who refuse to surrender their dignity, even when the odds seem impossible. If this story made you think about the importance of truth, fairness, and accountability, share your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe the jury is beginning to see what really happened? What would you do if you found yourself standing against someone who seemed impossible to challenge? And don't miss the next chapter, where long-hidden evidence begins to surface. Loyalties are tested, and the courtroom learns that the truth has a way of arriving exactly when it is needed most.